Good evening, everyone. My name's Nick. I'm the priest in charge here at St. Luke's Episcopal Church, and I'm just here to welcome you and say thank you for being here and supporting this worthy cause. If you do need to go inside and use the restroom, you can go through the triple doors right behind me. Go to the left, you'll see the restroom on the left. And we do have strict masking policies here while you're indoors, so please wear a mask while you're inside. And once again, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having us.
Welcome to everyone. Thank you for being here. About a year ago, Becky spoke with a reporter about the Catholic Diocese of Richmond's reconciliation program. She said, "The perpetrator who abused me, how many victims did he have?" I couldn't get that information when I called the victim assistance coordinator in Richmond. She said, "It's about information." I think survivors want that. Information. An informed public. An informed flock. A church that lives in the truth. As Becky tells her story to us, listen for two things. First, for her poetic eloquence in plumbing the depths of her suffering. She will read a poem to you called I Lament. Let me just preview one line of the poem, a line that moved me to tears. I lament the little girl who hated seeing him say Mass because she would have to see the same hands that hurt me hold the chalice. But that's not all, the eloquence. Listen for something else too. Half a century has passed. The criminal Monsignor killed himself nearly 30 years ago. Since then, Becky Ianni has gone on a quest to know and understand the truth about the crimes that she suffered. A heroic quest, like Odysseus. She went armed with the weapons she has in here and in here. When the Catholic hierarchy cover-up machine ran into the mind, the skills, and the courage of Ms. Becky Ianni, they ran into a buzzsaw. They ran into someone who is not only more honest, but more intelligent, more resourceful, and immeasurably more brave. It's a privilege for us to be able to hear what she has to say. Becky Ianni.
My son just walked up, so I might cry. My name's Becky Ianni, but I was born Becky Plumley. I was born in 1957 in Alexandria, Virginia, not far from here. When I was 4, my family moved into a house on Putnam Place in Alexandria. It was a super good neighborhood. I had lots of friends. I felt comfortable going into anybody's house in the neighborhood. We played huge games of hide and seek and kickball and all the other things that kids do. I had 2 parents who loved me and 2 brothers who tolerated me even when I sold their little buffalo nickels for ice cream. They let me participate in many of their games. I was a well-loved and confident little girl. I grew up as part of a devout Catholic family. The church was a huge part of our lives. When we moved to Putnam Place, we joined St. Mary's Church. I attended Catholic church along with my brothers for 12 years. My parents were very active in the church. My dad was into finances and he was on the financial parish council. And my parents would stay after church probably 2 times a month to count the offertory. So I was kind of like a rectory brat. I was all over the rectory. I felt comfortable and safe wandering the rectory. In many ways, I was living an ideal world. I had a loving family, lots of friends, and a blind faith that only a child can have. In 1965, when I was 8, a newly ordained priest, Father William Reinecke, joined our parish. Father Reinecke was quiet, he was charming, and many moms told me they thought he was good looking. He gave inspiring homilies, and he soon was everybody's favorite priest. My brother was studying to be an altar boy, and my mother didn't drive, so he would bring my brother back and forth to practice and back and forth to Mass. And he began to befriend our family, or otherwise groom us. He spent a good deal of time in my house. He would eat dinner at our house 2 and 3 times a week, often staying over to drink beer and play cards with my family. He would watch TV and play board games with us. He was also a favorite of all the moms in the neighborhood. He would go out and play football with the kids. All the parents loved and trusted him. Father Reinecke would hold weekly prayer meetings at my house. He would often say Mass in our basement, the same place where much of my abuse took place. He gave our family a special document. I'll never forget it. My mother kept it on her wall until she passed away. And it was from the Pope, and it said, if you say the name Jesus Christ on your deathbed, you'll go straight to heaven. So I thought, Father Reinecke knows the Pope? You know, he's God. And to my mind, we had God in our house. And it was like having a special God, and I felt very special. Father Reinecke made me feel special in other ways. He took me out of school to have my picture taken with him for Ash Wednesday. He allowed me to go into the vestry of the church where the altar boys changed their clothes. He even allowed me upstairs in his 3rd floor bedroom. And I remember sitting on a chair and my feet didn't even touch the ground because I was so little. Looking back, I think, why was I ever allowed up in his bedroom? He went on vacation with us on more than one occasion. He went to the beach with us. I remember him visiting my room that I shared with my grandmother there. He took my brother and other boys on trips to Williamsburg where he would abuse others. I remember being jealous because I wanted his attention and I wanted him to take me on trips too. He would invite us to have dinner at the rectory. On Sunday, we would go there and sit at the big dining room table, and the cook would cook us these fabulous meals. I loved and trusted him, and I wanted his attention. And he used this trust and this love to start abusing me. And I think that's what hurts me the most, is I thought he was my friend. I thought he was my own representative of God. And he used that love of God to abuse me. I remember the first time that I was abused. It was at night, and their TV was on, and I was wearing a flannel Lands nightgown. And I remember my mother told me to put on a robe, but, I was 8 years old, and I was like, I'm not putting on a robe. And he had me sit on his lap, and he started rubbing my leg, and I thought, well, that felt good. It didn't bother me. And then he put his hand underneath my nightgown, and eventually ended up raping me with his hands. And I remember freezing and thinking, what is he doing? I didn't know about sex, but I knew it felt dirty and wrong, but I just froze and I said nothing. He then went upstairs and had dinner with my family. And I remember sitting around the kitchen table thinking, doesn't anyone see that I'm different? Doesn't anyone notice that something's wrong with me? But I didn't say a word and nobody noticed anything. I started hiding when he came over. Our basement was finished, and we had this closets in the basement underneath the steps. And there was one short closet where we kept the suitcases. And I would go into that closet, and I would take an envelope, and I would slide down the latch. And I would hide there for hours, hoping he wouldn't find me. I also hid under our dining room table. We had a big tablecloth, and I would lay on the chairs. And he would walk right past, and I'd be very still. And I learned to hide because then he couldn't find me. He couldn't hurt me. And I could hear the doorbell ring, and my friends would come over, and I wouldn't come out. My friend told me later, as an adult, she said, we thought you stopped liking us, so we started making fun of you. And we was isolated. So then I was further isolated from my friends. I had no friends. I was terrified. He took me out of school for various reasons and abused me in the vestry of the church. I remember he took me out one day and I was wearing my little white Peter Pan collar and my little plaid skirt that you wore to Catholic schools. And he took me into the vestry of the church where the altar boys changed clothes and where all the gowns were hanging. And I remember counting the gowns as he abused me to try to get in my mind and go somewhere else. I'd go 1, 2, 3. And I remember the colors, you know, green, purple, the stoles that they would wear. And he rubbed his hands up and down what was the front of me. I had no breasts, but that's where he rubbed. And from that point forward, I wore a very thick sweater to school every day. It didn't matter if it was 95 degrees or if it was 60, I wore that sweater. And of course, when it was 95, the kids started making fun of me. What are you hiding? Little do they know the truth of what I was hiding. But I never took off that sweater because I thought that just might protect me. I was not safe at anywhere. I wasn't safe at home. I wasn't safe at school, and I was definitely not safe at church. I hated going to church on Sundays because I would see those hands, and he would hold that chalice, the same hands that raped me. I hated going to confession because I was terrified that I would go in that booth and he would be on the other side. And once my brother got old enough to drive, my brother was also abused by this perpetrator. He would drive us to a different church so we could go to confession. He was at our parish for 4 years until he was moved to another parish where I know he abused others. I found out later that 2 men, contemporaries of my parents, had gone to the bishop because they were concerned about Father Reinecke's activities with young boys. He was having wrestling afternoons. He was taking the kids to Williamsburg where his parents lived on all these trips. And so they went to the bishop and talked to him. And I said, what did the bishop say? He said, oh, he didn't say anything. He just moved him. He moved him to St. Charles Bramo Parish in Arlington, where he abused at least 2 others. I never told anyone as a child. I had been taught that priests were sent by God, and therefore God was punishing me. I never once thought it was his fault. I always blamed myself. I figured I was a dirty little girl. Maybe I had more original sin. I didn't know, but I thought it's my fault, so I wasn't going to tell anyone. And I've been taught by God, and also the priest indicated to me, Father William Reinecke, that I go to hell if I told anyone. And for a little girl who had just made her confession and her first communion and her confirmation, the idea of going to hell was terrifying. And I also knew that God could read my mind, so I blocked it out completely. And I think that's the only way I survived. I did not remember my abuse at all until the age of 48. And even though I didn't remember my abuse, it affected my entire life. I had frequent, by the way, this is the age of me. That's the age when my abuse started. And even though I didn't remember it affected me, I had frequent stomach aches and nightmares. I became very distracted at school and at home. I read constantly. I couldn't stand to be in the world I was in, so I made up make-believe worlds. I remember reading all the William Farley Black Stallion books because I could be the heroine. And I wanted to be a heroine so badly. So I would take those books and I would put them inside my book at school, and I would read them. And so my grades went down, and so did my effort because I wasn't paying attention in school. It was safer to live in a make-believe world than to live in my real world. I was afraid of boys, abnormally so, but I didn't understand why. So I felt weird. I didn't know why I was different than everyone else. My mom at one time got me a ticket to go to cotillion. I don't know if you know what cotillion is, but you get to go and they teach you etiquette and they teach you to dance and so forth. And I sobbed and cried for an entire week and begged her not to make me go. She didn't understand why I didn't want to go, but eventually she gave in because I was afraid if I went, I would have to dance with a boy and they would touch me. And that was something I couldn't handle. I was so scared. I remember my first job, I worked at the library. And I had been there about a week, and a boy asked me out on a date. And I didn't know how to say no, so I said yes. And then went home and I told my mother we had to go on vacation because I couldn't possibly be there that next weekend. My mother's like, you just started your job, you can't take a vacation. And I cried and sobbed so much, she finally did. I took a vacation for a week and told the guy I couldn't go. We had an emergency in the family. I was out of there. Of course, he never asked me out again, which is probably a good thing. I began to realize I was very much not like everybody else. It wasn't normal. But I began to be two people. The people that everyone saw that was calm and kind and smiled, and the person inside who was scared and terrified and felt so completely isolated. I never dated until college, and even then it was very hard. I was afraid to put myself into a situation where a boy might try something. Not because they would try something, because I felt I didn't know how to say no. I hadn't said no to my perpetrator. How was I going to say no? I wanted to be normal, but I thought something was wrong with me, and that made me different from everybody else. It was a horrible feeling. I always felt the need to be the perfect friend. I listened but never shared my true self. I didn't want them to see how abnormal I was, how flawed I was. I always felt a little bit like an outsider, like I never fit in. In 2006, I came across this picture. I was looking through my childhood pictures. And all of my emotions and memories I had been suppressing for 40 years came to a head. And I finally told someone. I told my husband, and then I told a therapist. I went through periods of extreme anxiety and depression. I knew God was going to send me to hell because I had finally told on a priest. And here I was, a 48-year-old woman with 4 children. But inside I was that 8-year-old little girl that was afraid of going to hell. I had many days where getting out of bed was more than I could handle. I cried all the time. I find myself on the bathroom floor or in my closet hiding, praying that I wouldn't wake up in the morning. Not because I wanted to be dead, but just because I wanted to be away from the pain. I never knew until this time that mental pain could be so much more worse than physical pain. I would fantasize about driving down the road and just letting go and say, hey, God will take care of me. If I hit a tree, I hit a tree. But I couldn't do that to my family. I loved them too much. I had flashbacks. I had disassociation. Sometimes I would sit down. I played a lot of solitaire. My husband used to make fun of me. I played a lot of solitaire. I would sit down to play solitaire, and 6 hours later, I'd realize, oh my gosh, it's 3 a.m. and I'm still playing solitaire. Anything to escape the pain that was going on in my head. I was worried God was mad at me. I felt it was my fault. I was so ashamed. So my therapist suggested that I go to the church, and maybe they could tell me they were sorry, and they could tell me it wasn't my fault, and that God still loved me. So I met with 3 people from the diocese. I met with the victim assistant coordinator, Pat Mott. I met with Father Mealy, he was the vicar of clergy, and I met with the chancellor, who was their lawyer. And I met in my therapist's office, and I sobbed and I cried, and much like today, I told them my entire story and everything I felt. And I told them what I needed. I said, I need you to say you're sorry. I need you to tell me it's not my fault and I'm not going to hell. I need your support. And I didn't get any of those things. At the end of the meeting, they said to me, you have a very complicated case, and we're going to send all your records to Richmond. I had gone to the Diocese of Arlington because that's where I was a parish. I was still going to church, and I thought they would help me. And the chancellor told me, well, when Arlington was formed out of Richmond, we took on the properties and the personnel, but not the liabilities. And so I was labeled a liability. And for 18 months, they passed me from one to the other. Oh, you're not our problem. You're not our problem. And every time I said, what's going on? They said, oh, well, we're discussing it. Absolutely no information. I felt abandoned. I felt abandoned by the church. I felt abandoned by God. So now I lost everything. My church, my home, and now God. I had no God. He wasn't there. So it was a very rough time for me, and I fell into this super black hole. And I didn't know how to get out of it. I didn't know what to do. And so another victim of my abuser told me to call SNAP, which is the Survivors Network of those abused by priests. And I finally got up the nerve, and I called. And I talked to David Kalahesi, who at the time was the executive director. And he spent over an hour on the phone with me. And he told me that everything that I was going through was normal. Because I thought, I'm insane. I thought, I'm making this up, what is going on? And he suggested that I start going to a support group that they ran. And so I did. For the first time, I went and I listened to other survivors. And I heard them talk about being ashamed. And I heard them talk about being hurt and angry and sad and all the things that I felt. And for the first time since I was 8 years old, I felt normal. And it was such a great feeling to feel like I was normal. And it gave me hope. By listening to others tell their stories, I was able to tell mine. I began to share my story, and each time I told my story, I got stronger and stronger. And each time I told my story, the shame got less. And it took me years to realize it wasn't my fault. I should not be ashamed. The shame is his. As I began to heal, I wanted to do something for other survivors. I wanted to be the person on that other end of the phone when someone was desperate like I was. So I became a leader in SNAP. Through SNAP, I've heard hundreds of survivor stories. I've been honored every time someone tells me a story, and a little bit of me heals, knowing someone else isn't in that dark place. I began to speak out publicly and doing interviews and holding press conferences. I was telling Father my first interview that I did was in 2008 when the Pope came here to Washington, D.C. And I hadn't done anything, and I called my kids and said, "Are you okay if I'm on the news?" And they said, "Sure, Mom, go ahead." So I did this interview, and I came home, and I walked in the house and my phone rang. And it was the father of one of my kids' friends. And he said, "I just saw you on TV, and I just want to tell you I support you, and you are very brave." And I burst into tears. I'm sobbing and crying. And my kids come downstairs, and they said, "Mom, what's wrong?" I said, "I did an interview, and I was actually on the news." And they're like, "Isn't that what you wanted?" And I was like, "No." And, speaking out publicly. And so I hid in my house for a full week because, of course, I thought the entire world now knew about my abuse. And I felt dirty, and I felt people out there, my friends are going to think less of me. My friends are going to think, "Geez, got abused." And I was terrified to leave my house. And it took me years, and I continued to speak out, because every time I spoke out, I got a call from another survivor. So I continued to do it. I was never comfortable doing it for years, because I was still had that shame and that guilt. And so this is something that happens when you're a child, but it goes on for your entire life. And so if you're here and you're a survivor, and there's could be a big shot you are, because something like 1 in 5 women, 1 in 6 men, that's 25% of the population will be abused before the age. So I want you to know you're not alone, that you can reach out. There are people who will listen, and that we understand. And so that's the end of my story. But now what I want to talk about a little bit, I want to take that story and everything I've told you, and I want to apply is, how can we fix this? What can we do to make things better? And that's my goal. I want to make things better. Every day I wake up and say, what can I do to protect a child? What can I do today to reach out to a survivor? And I think if we have that mindset, we can turn this crisis around. And so the first thing I want to talk about is, what do you say when someone comes up to you and says they were abused? We want to make sure that we create this safe environment. So you want to say 3 things. I am so sorry this happened to you. That tells them you're sorry, but it also tells them you believe them, and that's important. You want to tell them this is not your fault, no matter what. And third, how can I support you? Those 3 things. I'm so sorry this happened to you. This is not your fault, no matter what. How can I support you? If you say those 3 things, you're going to open up a dialogue with that person, and they're going to feel like they can talk to you. And if you're the first person they ever told, they might tell someone else. On the flip side, what not to say or ask a survivor. Why did you wait so long to tell? We hear that over and over and over again. And it's a legitimate question, but it's not one you should ask a survivor, but I'm going to answer it for you. Why do we wait so long? Because we're ashamed. We are afraid to come forward. What if we come forward and we're not believed? How many times do we see a survivor come forward and people rally around the perpetrator, and then the survivor still is abandoned? The fear of not being believed. The guilt. How can you come forward when you think something is your fault? Fear of repercussions. We have perpetrators that threaten people with guns. We have perpetrators that say, well, if you tell on someone, no one's going to believe you. If you tell on someone, your mother's going to lose her job. And so there's the fear of repercussions. And then my own personal fear that people will think less of you when you tell them what happened. So that's one thing. Don't ask a survivor why they waited so long. There are so many reasons. Second, why did you keep letting it happen? I ask myself that all the time. After I was abused that first time, why didn't I never sit on his lap again? But he had all the power. He was God's representative. I felt I had no choice. Another thing, people often say to me, well, you need to forgive your abuser to heal. Forgiveness is very personal. I have forgiven my perpetrator. I couldn't hold the anger anymore and heal, so I have forgiven my perpetrator. Not quite sure I've forgiven the church yet that allowed it to happen, but I'm working on it. But survivors don't need to forgive their abusers if they're not ready, and they may never be ready, and that's their personal choice, and no one should say to them, this is how you have to heal. Everybody's healing journey is personal, and they should get to choose how they're going to heal, and you should be there to just support them. Another thing we see often happen is don't minimize the abuse. We see a lot of people minimize it. This happens in all organizations. That may be true, but it happened in this organization, and that organization hurt me. Just a few priests, not many priests. It's not all priests. Again, it doesn't matter. I actually was in a car with someone going to a press event, and this is someone who was a supporter of mine, and she knew my perpetrator. And she says, well, I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said that your Father Reinecke stayed up all night with his grandmother, so he wasn't all bad. And that might be true too, but it's not a scale. He still hurt me. So be careful what you say. We've heard abuse be called things like inappropriate behavior, boundary violations. I even had one priest who called it, I was just being overly affectionate. This is sexual assault and sexual abuse. These are crimes, and we need to call it by what it is. Second, when you hear a priest, a pastor, a rabbi, etc., that's been accused of abuse, what should you do? Sometimes it's hard. This might be a priest that you really, really care for and you want to support. And if you want to support them, that's fine, but please do it privately. Because when you publicly state, oh, he would never do this, absolutely, you're telling that victim, you're a liar. And not only are you telling that victim, any other victims out there are going to say, I'm not coming forward. I am not coming forward because I'm not going to believe. And not even from that perpetrator, from any perpetrator. Because we need to build this safe environment where they feel comfortable coming forward. And another thing you should know is a very small percentage are false accusations. Something like less than 3%. And the majority of those are custody cases, where the parents have accused each other versus the survivor. It is so hard for a survivor to come forward. The average survivor doesn't come forward to the age of 52. So rarely are there false allegations. So what can we do? What other things can we do to create this safe environment so that the children that we love will be safe and that the survivors will be comfortable and supported when they come forward? The number one thing is education, much like you're doing today. Educate yourself. Identify the signs of abuse, the effects of the abuse. Understand what grooming is. Educate those around you. Talk to your family. You might want to sit down with your kids and say, hey, I just went to this talk and this person was talking about, did anything like this ever happen to you? They might have been hiding it for 30 years, 10 years, 5 years. Don't be afraid to talk about it. Educate your children. Make sure your children know they can come and talk to you about anything. Talk to them about sex. And I know it's when I was little, my parents weren't going to talk to me about sex. That was not a subject you talked about. Talk to them, and I'm very proud of my kids because they have taught their kids that it's okay to ask questions about sex. Sometimes I cringe a little bit. My grandson came up the other day and he said to me, "Mom, Grammy, does Sprocket's my dog, does Sprocket have a penis?" And I'm like, "Yes, Sprocket has a penis. He's a boy. So Granddad has a penis." I said, "Yes." He says, "But you don't because you're a girl." And I said, "Yes." And, but those are good things. As awkward as that is, it's a good thing that kids know the proper terms and that they're comfortable talking about this. Because if someone touches them in the wrong way, they know what to say. They know it's okay to talk about. And so it's very, very important. There's an organization called RAINN, RAINN, and there'll be a sheet up here with their information. And they have some really good information on there about what's appropriate to tell children and how to talk to them about it. My goal as a SNAP leader and as a survivor is that, a child runs across and they fall down and they break their knee and it bleeds, and they know to go to a trusted adult and they'll put a Band-Aid on and they'll make them feel better. My goal is that a child will feel just that comfortable coming and telling us when someone has touched them in a way that they're uncomfortable with. And that's the goal. Second, if you see something, say something. You don't have to be 100% sure. Go to the local authorities, the police, or Child Protective Services. It's their job to investigate. Because if you hesitate because you're not 100% sure, another child could be hurt. So make sure if you suspect something, go to the authorities and let them investigate it. You can donate. You can donate money. Even better, you can donate time. You can donate to an organization like Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, or Rape and Crisis Centers, or there's a great organization in Washington, D.C. called Safe Shores. They're an advocacy group for child protection. Another easy way that everyone in this room can do is write comments. When you see an article in the Washington Post or the New York Times or whatever you read, a local newspaper, about abuse, go in and usually they have a comment section and make a comment. A couple years ago there was an article about a 15-year-old who was abused by a 31-year-old teacher. And I went in and looked at the comments. And the comments were things like, "What a lucky dude," and things like this. And I thought, survivors read these comments. So I went in there and said, "Thanks to this brave survivor, he probably saved other teenagers from being abused. My heart goes out to you." Put a comment down. That's supporting survivors. That's making them. And also, the more comments you make, the more the newspaper will cover these type of articles, and the more it'll be in the news. Another thing you can do is write letters to the editor. If you see something going on, put your opinion down and write it. It doesn't always get published, but again, the more letters to the editor that you submit, the more they're going to cover that subject. If you're a survivor, reach out for support. Report your abuse to the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office in Virginia has a tip line that you can call if you were abused or if you know something. And they are investigating cases, and their information is going to be on this sheet up here. And so please report it. Invite survivors to tell your story at your parish. If you're not from this parish, you're from a different parish. See, they won't let me come and talk, or another survivor come and talk. Because I think there's nothing more touching than hearing an actual story to understand the reality of abuse. Work to abolish laws that protect predators and not children, like statutes of limitations. I know in Pennsylvania they're trying to change it, in Maryland they're trying to change the statute of limitations. There's no criminal statute of limitations in Virginia or Maryland on child sex crimes, but there is civil. And so we're trying to change that. Also, mandatory reporting laws, getting tougher mandatory reporting laws. So, to me, my abuser, yes, he committed a crime. But the bigger crime is that he was allowed to go on and abuse others. So we need to make sure those that enable or allow abuse also are punished, not just those that abuse. So when you take this handout, there's a handout here that says 21 things you can do. And if each of you go home this week and do one thing, you will have helped create a safer environment for all those children you love, and for victims to come forward so they can begin to heal. So that's the end of my presentation, but I want to end and kind of tie things together by reading the poem that he mentioned. I wrote this poem when I had no hope. I didn't know what to do with all my feelings, so I wrote it. And then last year, I decided to add a verse because I have in such a different place now than I was then. It's called I Lament. I lament for the little girl who lost her innocence at the age of 8, who couldn't say no, who felt dirty and bad, who was terrified of going to hell if she told, who lost her sense of safety in her home and hid under the steps in the closet when he came over, whose self-confidence was lost, who disappeared inside of books where it was safe, who cut her very long hair so that no one would notice her or touch her hair anymore, especially him, who hated seeing him say Mass because he would have to see the same hands that hurt her hold the chalice, who repressed her memories of her abuse where they couldn't hurt her anymore, but they did anyway. I lament for the adolescent who was afraid of boys, not because of what they might try with her, but her fear of being unable to say no, who knew she wasn't normal but didn't understand why, who wanted a boyfriend but was too afraid to have one, who stayed home from dances and cried because she was too afraid to dance with boys because that meant they would touch her, who became two people, the one that smiled and was everybody's best friend, and the one who saw inside who felt alone, isolated, and afraid. I lament for the young college student who was so afraid to leave home, who was afraid to be around boys in a social setting, who cried because she so desperately wanted to be normal, who never thought anyone would want to be her friend or love her, who had a hard time trusting. I lament for the man who married this woman, who had many challenges in their marriage, whose wife was afraid to trust, whose wife was unable to believe that she was worthy of love and devotion, whose wife was triggered by events but didn't understand why, whose wife went through periods of depression for unknown reasons. I lament for the victim, who remembered her abuse at the age of 48, whose flashbacks are terrifying, who has spent many nights curled up in her bathroom crying and afraid, who sometimes prays she won't wake up in the morning, whose family has been affected by her deep sadness, who feels abandoned by God when she needs him the most, who feels guilty for those that were abused after her because she didn't tell, who desperately needs to find God but is too afraid to reach out and find out he isn't there, who just wants to be whole. I rejoice for the 63-year-old survivor who has found support from her family, friends, and fellow survivors, who reported her abuse to the police, whose self-confidence is growing, who no longer feels ashamed by what happened to her, who finally understands it wasn't her fault, who isn't afraid to speak out, who is part of the SNAP family, who has found healing by sharing her stories with others, who now has hope. Thank you.
We thank you, Becky. One brave lady. And I think everyone here for participating and listening and learning deserves some credit for bravery also. We're going to just take a brief break. If you have a question, there are note cards with pens scattered throughout the seating area. Please write down your question on the card. I'll collect the cards and pose the questions. Maybe at this point, while we're doing that, anyone who wants to write down a question, we'll start distributing the handouts. And I think we may have a basket to pass to try to, if anybody would like to make any kind of donation to continue to support this effort, the I Survived and I Have a Vision series. This is the last of the 3 summer speaking engagements. what your donations would go towards at this point would be further development of series like this, and also to pay for my canonical defense. I've just been cited by my bishop for disobedience and incitement to hatred of the ordinary, the bishop. So I have to mount some kind of elaborate defense for that. It's not going to be cheap. So anyway, the money will go to that and to the further development of this kind of event. Thank you for being here. I'll collect the questions and we'll distribute the handouts. We'll just have a 2 or 3 minute break at this point. First question, other than your siblings, do you know any other victims who were with you at the church where you were abused by the same perpetrator?
I don't know if they were at the same church as myself, but I know the church has acknowledged there were 11 other victims, and I know of 3 others. And what you have to understand is probably for every victim that comes forward, there's 10 that haven't. So there's probably dozens of victims.
How did you negotiate your first sexual experience with your husband?
Very carefully. I will say there was probably alcohol involved. And a lot of patience on my husband's part.
Very brave to take that question. How would you handle your situation if the priest were still alive? Could you still forgive him?
I think so. I think it would have been easier. In some ways, I felt like he took the easy way out. You know, I would have liked to have talked to him. I would like to say why, although maybe I wouldn't have liked the answer. But I would like have had the opportunity to confront him in some way. And so I kind of feel cheated. I'm still working on a letter that I want to leave on his gravesite, telling him how I feel. And I thought maybe that's how I would communicate.
Father, can I extend that one? Becky, you had said that you had forgiven him, but you haven't forgiven the church. Can you talk a little bit about that, about your relationship with the religion that you grew up with?
Yes, I think because I've seen so much harm done by the church. Not necessarily the priests, yes, that abuse, but the church that's covered it up, the church that hasn't reached out with the appropriate support. And so I have a harder time. It's hard to forgive an organization who says sorry but doesn't change. And I think that when we start seeing more changes, and true forgiveness for me is going to come when I see those changes, when I see them doing things that I think are going to protect children. I mean, they're the ultimate shepherds, and they really need to do everything possible to protect children and to reach out to survivors. And too many times we're hitting brick walls still today.
Thank you.
That ties in with this question. What kind of response would you like to see? And what would you like to see the Catholic laity advocate for from the hierarchy?
I think if you were to ask your parish, your bishop, to turn over all the records to the Attorney General. Don't wait till they have to be subpoenaed. Turn over any records to do with child abuse to those who are trained to investigate. That's the first. Be completely open and transparent. When a survivor calls, I called and I said, can you tell me how many victims there were of Father Reinecke? Were any of them female? We can't tell you that because of confidentiality. I wasn't asking for names. I wasn't asking for when. I just wanted to know, was I alone? And I couldn't even get that information. So until they're more transparent and they're more open, I would demand that. And demand that. Say, you want the answers. Don't be silent. And, I don't tell people to leave the church even though I've left the church. Instead, I would ask you to be an instrument of change within the church. Do what you can to change the church, to speak out, to be vigilant, to protect the people that you love.
Just a note on the turning over of the information to the Attorney General in the state of Virginia, which the bishops of Virginia entered into an agreement with the Attorney General's office to do that and publish statements to the effect that they had cooperated completely. We've given over everything. I spoke to the member of the office who's handling the investigation who said that that's just simply not true. That they have to pull teeth to get anything. So Becky's right on the money. This is something that we need to stand up and push for.
You know, and another thing I like to see them push for, you know, they released lists, both Arlington and Richmond, released list of accused priests. That list is very limited. And I'd like to see a uniform rules of who gets on the list. Arlington might have different rules than Richmond, might have different rules than any other diocese. I'd like it to be uniform, and I'd like them to add to that list deacons, nuns, and lay people that have abused, and those that have abused adults. We are getting more and more calls these days from adults that were abused. And I think all of this has sort of been left out. They do a little bit and say, hey, look, we've done this, we're done. But they need to expand. They need to do more.
Is anything being done on a federal level to make the Catholic Church accountable?
We have been trying to do a federal initiative. I know Jennifer Wexton, I think she's a representative, and she has a bill that is trying to change some of it. Again, it's really hard to do things on a federal level, but it's something we keep pushing for, even if it's just saying if they do it on the state level, we'll give them money and funding. So those are kinds of some of the things that we're working on. And that's, you know, if you want to volunteer for something like that, that's something we're always looking to do.
This one's really a little bit more of a statement, but it's very beautiful. Maybe that'd be a comment on it. I'm a survivor, and finally years ago began to tell my story. It took years, and only with the loving support of an incredible wife and a gifted therapist. And this comment concludes with, tell your story.
Yes, and whoever you are, thank you for telling your story. It doesn't matter who you tell it to, but the fact that you told it. And it's incredibly brave every time someone tells a story. It's difficult, and whoever it is, yeah, let's clap for whoever that was. And if you want to talk to someone else, I'm here.
All right, well, let's get Becky one more round of applause. Thank you for giving us this gift. And thank you all very much for being here. And thank you, Father Nick, for your very kind hospitality here at
And on the reference page is my information and my phone number, my email. If you come up with another question, you have a concern, shoot me an email. Give me a call. You know, as you can see, no question is bad. So you can ask me anything. And if I don't want to answer it, I won't. Yes. Is that what you think?